I was actually in the room when you and Anita Oberbauer started the idea of installing this summit. And so I can tell you, we are very in debt to you for having come up with this vision. And out came a community of people feeling alike. So thank you very much for that. I also want to thank our sponsors. They are listed here, the Global Methane Hub and PACT. Without your sponsorship, an event like this would not be possible. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Now, while this summit is largely focused around enteric methane mitigation and everything around it, agricultural emissions also are spanning further. We all know that it's not just beef and dairy that generate methane, even though they might be the largest sources. There are other important considerations. One of them is food waste. You have all heard that we're not very good in being efficient in using the food we produce. About 40% of the food that's produced is never eaten by people. Just think about that. While a lot of our focus is on working with farmers, we all, as consumers, play an important role too. We will address that issue with one of our panelists. We'll talk about feed conversion as a lever to reduce greenhouse gases. We will talk about industry coordination. We talk about cross-species learnings from beef to dairy, but also pork, and see how well our barnyard is working together. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our first panelist, who is Minerva Ringland. One second. My notes. No, sorry. My first panelist is Maria Bowman. She directs the Agriculture Nitrogen Program at Spark Climate Solutions, where she works to transform nitrogen use into more circular, targeted, and efficient systems. She was previously economist at the USDA's Economic Research Service, and she holds a PhD in Agriculture and Resource Economics from UC Berkeley. Please help me welcome Dr. Maria Bowman.
Thank you, Frank. And before I jump in, I just want to say how excited I am to be here. Ever since joining Spark a little under a year ago, I've heard about this event. I've heard about it from fellow folks at Spark. I've heard about it from people that I've encountered as I've traveled and in the industry. And it definitely lives up to all of the hype. So a real pleasure to be here. And I've learned a ton about methane and enteric methane over the last couple of days. As an economist without a strong background in methane or ruminant nutrition, I've learned a ton about the challenges here. And I know we're all here because we care about methane, but I'm going to take my 5 to 7 minutes to tell you why you should care about nitrogen if you don't already. That includes nitrous oxide and other forms of reactive nitrogen. Together, nitrous oxide from methane and from the production of animal feed make up about 15% of livestock's global greenhouse gas footprint, according to data from the GLEAM model that we heard about earlier this event. If we look only at farm gate emissions and exclude land use change and pre and post-production CO2, that number's closer to 20%. And similar to methane, nitrous oxide emissions from agriculture are growing and are projected to continue to grow as production increases to meet the global demand for food. Unlike methane, where we see near-term impacts of mitigation on warming, for nitrogen, it's about the long game when it comes to climate. Nitrogen has a warming potential that is nitrous oxide has a warming potential that's 273 times that of carbon dioxide. It's a really potent greenhouse gas. And much like carbon dioxide, once it's up there, it's there for a long time. Nitrous oxide sticks around for more than 100 years, and the only way to deal with it, at least right now, is not to emit it in the first place. However, climate is one of the many benefits of reducing nitrogen losses from agriculture, as you probably know. In addition to the impact on warming, reducing nitrous oxide emissions protects the ozone layer, which has an impact on skin cancer and cataracts. Less nitrate leaching means better water quality. That's cleaner drinking water, reduced water treatment costs, healthier fisheries, cleaner lakes, algal blooms. Reducing ammonia reduces the formation of fine particulate matter, a major contributor to respiratory disease and improves air quality more broadly. Lastly, but certainly not least, maybe most important from my perspective, lost nitrogen is a lost opportunity to improve productivity and resiliency in crop and livestock systems, to restore linkages between those two systems, and to reduce costs of production and risks, including the risk of the impacts of future regulation for producers. At Spark, we're convinced that transforming how nitrogen is used and managed is worth it for all of these reasons, but also that there's a lot of hard work to be done together to rise to this challenge. In case you haven't heard about Spark and what we do over this event, we are a philanthropically funded nonprofit that accelerates progress on unsolved climate challenges. We're trying to speed up the development of the fields that are needed to address these challenges by using a number of tools to support new research, new markets, policies, and talent development. Within the agricultural nitrogen program at Spark, our goal is to advance transformative solutions to reduce agricultural nitrogen losses across crop and livestock systems, and critically across those linkages between them. On the crop side, that means things like new crop varieties. You heard about genetics in animal agriculture, same thing in crops. And the use of precision conservation in the field to reduce fertilizer use on consistently low-yielding zones. For livestock, we're thinking about things like alternative protein sources, yes, improved genetics also for NUE, and better manure storage and handling, also a solution in the enteric methane space. And at the interface between them, getting manure back onto cropland more effectively and putting crop and food waste to work as livestock feed. To get there, we're working to align researchers and other actors in this space around the highest impact priorities, build the case for R&D investment, fund and de-risk these promising approaches, and shift the policy and market incentives to make these changes worth it for producers and across the whole system. And don't get me wrong, we're building on a lot of momentum that already exists in this space. Research, extension, advocacy, and a lot of changes that are happening on the ground. Speaking from my experience in the US context, crop producers are increasingly using stabilizers and inhibitors to reduce nitrogen losses on their cropland, and they're shifting the timing of their nutrient applications to better align with when the crop needs the nutrients. Livestock producers are growing cover crops and annual forages that reduce nitrate leaching while reducing feed costs. They're investing in state-of-the-art manure management. There's so many examples of what producers are doing around the world, engaging in continuous improvement and innovation. I could go on for a while. But there's also more that can be done if we advance new solutions and align those research policy and market incentives. In the US, we're working right now with USDA and researchers to model the potential impacts of what we call nitrogen 2.0. Nitrogen 2.0 is our term for the future vision of a set of linked innovations across crop and livestock systems that we think could cut nitrogen losses in half. Let me give you a couple of examples. First, new corn varieties. Some modeling done by colleagues at Iowa State University suggests that new corn varieties with traits to improve nitrogen use efficiency could reduce synthetic fertilizer use by 15 to 25% and increase yield by up to 30%. This could reduce crop producer exposure to price volatility of commercial fertilizers, which is a big deal right now, as we know, and increase profitability while also reducing the emissions footprint of livestock products. On the livestock side, modeling suggests that reductions in nitrogen in animal feed combined with partial replacement of feed protein and the use of supplemental amino acids and non-protein nitrogen could reduce reactive nitrogen emissions from livestock operations by up to 25%. Mike Van Amberg shared yesterday that modeling from CNCPS showed a 10 to 12% reduction in nitrogen excretion from dairy cattle with a shift toward more metabolizable protein sources. And application of stacked technologies in manure storage, handling, processing, and application could double the amount of manure nitrogen that is retained and used by crops and replace up to 10% of fertilizer. A lot of this work should come out later this year as part of a PNAS special feature, so keep an eye out for that. For all of these solutions, substantial investment and coordination is needed to get to a place where these tools even exist, let alone where they are economic for producers. We recently held a workshop at Iowa State to talk about the challenges and opportunities of those new corn varieties that I mentioned. And much like this meeting, but on a smaller scale, we tried to get the right folks in the room to figure out what the barriers were. What challenges would producers have when they tried to implement these new varieties? What changes would they need to make to their planting, pest, and nutrient management strategies to make them work? what types of research and development activities were needed. We start by imagining what's possible and working backward to figure out what we would need to do to get where we want to go. Like with methane, and like you mentioned this morning, there's really no one-size-fits-all approach. We will need different tools that work for smallholders in sub-Saharan Africa, livestock producers in Latin America, and around the world if we want to address nitrogen losses at a global scale in the systems of the future, while increasing productivity and meeting the global demand for nutritious food. Fundamentally, this work requires that we tackle those hard problems together like we're doing here, that we get out of our silos and our bubbles, and we talk with each other over coffee, beers, snacks, wine. We commit to seeking out and bringing more resources to the table and deploying them for impact to ensure that we have the tools that we need to feed the world and leave the planet a little bit healthier than we found it for the generations to come. And with that, I look forward to hearing from the other panelists and the discussion this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Bowman. Our next speaker is Minerva Ringland, who is Senior Manager of Climate and Insights at REFeed. And that's a national nonprofit aiming at ending food loss and waste. She holds a master's from Brand School at UC Santa Barbara. Please help me welcome Minerva.
Great. How's that for volume? Good. All right. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to elevate food waste as part of the conversation that we're having around solution strategies. So thanks, Frank, for the quick intro on REFED. I'll give a little bit more background on what we do. So we're a US-based nonprofit that's really almost entirely focused on working to solve food waste. So there's a lot going on this slide, but there are a few different pillars to our work that map to how we see change being driven in the space. So the first pillar is data and insights. I sit on our research team, and we're really focused on aggregating data from public and proprietary sources across a system vetted by industry experts in order to tell the story of where food waste is taking place, why, and what solutions exist to address this problem, and what solutions are ready to scale. We also have a capital advisory arm where we connect funders with solution providers that are most aligned with their impact strategy. And we also, on the other side of things, support those solution providers in attracting capital. We also have a business advisory arm where we work one-on-one with major food businesses across the country to examine food waste in their operations. And lastly, we sit at the center of what I found to be a surprisingly large ecosystem of food waste players. And so we play a role in convening those stakeholders across the system to address the challenges and share learnings. So my role at REFED is specifically focused on understanding the climate and environmental impacts of food waste. And this is really a global issue. So Frank, you mentioned 40%. The numbers shift depending on what your scope boundaries are. And because food waste can look really different depending on, the geographic context. But about 1/3 of all food produced around the world ends up unsold or uneaten. This is about $1 trillion in value, and that's actually a 2014 number. So just think about how that's probably increased with inflation. And this is between 8 to 10% of global annual greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a really significant piece of the climate puzzle, and it's particularly tragic to think about food going to waste when food insecurity is so rampant. If we just bring this down to the US level, our latest data is for 2024, and we estimate that 29% of all food, domestic food production went unsold or uneaten, and that's a value of $380 billion. There's a lot of data that I could get into, so I'll just make a pretty shameless plug for checking out REFED's Insights Engine. It's a publicly available platform on our website housing 6 different tools that enable users to explore the problem of food waste as well as solutions. We have a solution provider directory, an impact calculator, a capital tracker, and a policy finder. Oops, wrong direction. So a few different speakers so far have highlighted that what gets measured gets managed. And so particularly from an impact perspective, when we can identify hotspots of food waste generation, we can then target those areas for reduction. And I promise I'm getting close to explaining how all of this relates to livestock enteric methane. But one of our foundational data sets is emission factors that allow us to calculate the total emissions in CO2 equivalents based on the volume of food waste and knowing what kind of food it is and where it came from, because we take a life cycle approach. So I've been on this really interesting journey over the last 3 years where, supported by the Global Methane Hub, we've been able to isolate the methane-specific contribution to that overall emissions factor and confirm the parts of the value chain that are most methane intensive. And so just to cut to the chase, that's landfill, which is where anaerobic environments that are very similar to the rumen produce methane from organic waste inputs, and then it's beef and dairy supply chains. And then just to be totally explicit about the connections that I'm seeing here, there are kind of 3 areas of intersection that we're actively exploring right now. So the first and most basic is that we should really be doing everything that we can to keep those high intensity, and this actually should say beef and dairy, products out of the landfill. And the incentives here are aligned because these are high value items from both an economic and nutritional perspective. The U.S. Food Waste PACT, which is a voluntary agreement among major food businesses across the country, investigated 2 whole chain partnership projects last year, looking at every stage in between processing and retail for ground beef and yogurt to identify where losses were most prevalent and identify some strategies for addressing them. So encourage you to check out those resources. The second is what I have here is optimized yield per animal. And I mean this in the truly per animal sense of using everything but the squeal, but also from a systems perspective where keeping herds healthy and not losing animals or material across supply chain stages can ultimately lower the methane intensity of those products. And someone yesterday asked, what are we gathering data for? What is data being used for? And so I just want to highlight here that I think this is a place where, although data collection can be burdensome and time intensive and expensive, it's a place where we've already figured out how to translate that to impact. And it's a step closer to really validating the efforts that are already being done to keep food waste or keep food in the value chain and validate a lot of the work that's already being done. So, and then the third place here is what I'm sure most of you thought of when I started talking, which is the opportunity to address the huge amount of byproducts from food manufacturing and other streams of excess by including them in animal feed. So I know this is an area where many of you are working. Professor Kabrab's lab just published a paper, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, on utilization of grape pomace. And we're also supporting projects in this area. So on the one hand, you're addressing a waste stream and keeping that out of less preferred destinations, but also ideally you're seeing a methane reduction by including that material in the feed. So I'm out of time, I think. So I'll just say quickly that the Global Methane Hub, again, supported us this last year in investigating upstream loss in beef and dairy supply chains. So this was a data gap for us, and we think it's an important step towards more comprehensively understanding the dynamics of these systems. We're hoping to finalize 2 industry-facing briefs next week, so please come find me afterwards if you are interested in learning more. And then the last exciting news that I wanted to share is that ReFed also manages a regranting vehicle that we call the Catalytic Grant Fund, which aims to support work that we see as both highly impactful and in a critical stage of development. So the most recent open call was themed around methane reduction. There's sort of 2 areas, one in beef and dairy loss prevention and advanced food recycling. So I'm very happy to share that we were able to distribute around $2 million to 10 total grantees, 4 in the beef and dairy side, and those are Gilly, I think Bo is here somewhere in the audience, University of Georgia, Golden State Foods, and Fermi 8. So I see my role here today as really encouraging folks in the room to consider food waste as a fundamentally complementary strategy to all the other research, progress, and innovation that we've been hearing about at this convening. So as you invest in these animals and technologies, let's also make sure that they are making it to market and fulfilling the producer's time, resources, energy. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you very much for those great remarks, and thanks for the work REFED is doing to keep food waste out of our streams. Just a reminder, please use Slido to submit your questions. Our next speaker is Dr. Samantha Werth. She is the Executive Director of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And that's a multi-stakeholder initiative advancing continuous improvement across the U.S. beef value chain. She completed her PhD many moons ago under my mentorship. I'm still very proud about that. And I would like to welcome you to the stage now. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay, and hopefully I'll be able to advance this in the correct direction first try. Yes. Okay. Good to be here. I'm always happy to be where I consider home in Davis. So really enjoyed discussions this week and really excited to share the work we've been doing here at the Roundtable to help advance sustainability for the beef value chain. Just a little bit of background, very similar to what you heard from Rory on our first evening together of the U.S. Roundtable is a multi-stakeholder organization. We have 140 members today. We were founded in 2015. And upon our founding, it was really about how do we align the beef value chain on sustainability? What is it? What are the things we can focus on together to make the biggest impact at the greatest rate of speed, right? And we're kind of transitioning now into a period where we're really moving from alignment into action. And so that's what I'll share a little bit on today is our most recent effort, which is our Sustainable Beef Research Roadmap. So a little background on how we got to the roadmap. We worked through the COVID period, and Sarah Place, if she's still in the room, was very instrumental in this piece of our work. But we worked through COVID across all of our supply chain members to establish industry-wide sustainability goals. So we were able to align on what are the key priorities across our 6 indicators of sustainability: air and greenhouse gas emissions, land resources, water resources, employee safety and well-being, animal health and well-being, and efficiency and yield. We have overarching goals now across all of those indicator areas, and then we also have sector-specific targets that track up into those overarching goals. So how does each sector take ownership over what they can do to make sustainable advances? Our goals launched in 2022. Following our goals launch, we have been working really closely with the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research to really understand where are a lot of the gaps in research today that are preventing us from making the progress we want to see for the beef supply chain. So in 2024, we hosted several convenings virtually and then in person to really build industry alignment around what do we know and what don't we know, what's preventing us in the research space from getting where we want to be with the U.S. beef supply chain. And that resulted in our research roadmap publication this past year. I, similar to Juan, have a card for you guys, but I should have done a postcard and not a business card because no one's going to be able to read it, but there is a QR code. So you guys can get all of the research roadmap information at the QR code. We also have a link there if you scroll down on that page to get involved. The point there being that we're looking to know, we know that a lot of research is already happening in the areas we've identified as priorities. So we want to know who's out there doing what. We also want to know who's interested in funding some of these priorities we've outlined. And so we've got kind of a survey form there that can help us to kind of play connector on some of these things and get the right people in front of the right funders. And then last thing here is that we're focusing now on, we've got the roadmap. We know what we're prioritizing. How do we actually do it? And so we've been working with a small group of researchers across the US to establish a research collaborative geared at really getting some of this work on the ground. So very quickly, high level, and again, there's a QR code so you can dive deeper. Our research roadmap has outlined 6 key critical research areas across our air, land, and water goals where we need to be focusing our research efforts. So that includes grazing management plans, feed yard optimization, genetic improvement, modeling to evaluate impact, innovation and technology, and producer practicality and trade-offs. I won't go into all of these, but you'll kind of notice here there's the little icons. Is that working? So we've got specific research topics under each of our critical research categories related to air, water, and land way over there. So just kind of high level when we're talking about grazing management plans and the research that we are interested in getting more clarity on, it's things like enteric and nitrogenous emissions, soil carbon storage and accrual. On the feed yard side, it's a lot on dietary impact, of enteric methane production and manure management. So really getting a lot of those foundational data points that we've been talking about being so important, and understanding kind of what levers we can pull with some of these research opportunities to then lead into what we think is a really critical piece, and Sarah mentioned it yesterday, is modeling to evaluate impact, right? We cannot get to every single cow in the United States to understand their methane impact, right? Or how their grazing management strategies are impacting soil carbon sequestration, but we can get a lot better at the numbers and understanding what levers we can pull through research and utilize that in a modeling framework to be able to better understand what levers we can pull, what are the opportunities by the different regions across the US for us to make progress. We've also got under innovation and technology a focus on what is the efficacy of methane mitigation strategies, additives in extensive systems particularly, but also in intensive systems. And then just rounding it out, and you'll maybe hear a little bit more, and you did hear yesterday some of this, that genetic improvement is a key factor here, and that's impactful across air, land, and water, long-term sustained improvements, right? And then finally, producer practicality and trade-offs. And I think this is a piece that's really important to highlight, is that trade-off piece. I think that we all have ambitious goals in the methane mitigation space, and we have the tools available to mitigate emissions. How do we do it at scale and in a way that's going to be practical for producers? And then can we recognize some of those trade-off points, right? Maybe it's not always going to be the economically viable option to mitigate emissions. So how do we incentivize that in a way that we do make sure that we're prioritizing the economics of a producer in a small business operation? So last thing here, and this again is all available online, but we have kind of 3 critical areas of innovation and action. So beyond the research needs, there's also a really huge need to be able to figure out producer incentives. How do we have a structure in place to really support producers and incentivize them to make these changes for the long term? We also need technical support. I think that's something we've seen a loss in over this past couple of years, is funding for technical support, but that's absolutely critical. You need the technical support out on the ground with producers to help them troubleshoot practice changes and really be successful in adopting new practices. And then the last thing is a trusted advisor support network. We know that our producers are going to look at other producers in their area, right, and their colleagues to see what are they doing, what's working for them. They're going to be more likely to adopt practice changes if they see that it actually works in real life. So helping to build out that network of let's have a community of producers really helping to expand impact. So with that, there's the QR code finally, and then there are these guys out at the registration table. Would welcome any sort of discussions. I'll be here all day to talk through more of the specifics on the roadmap, but there's a lot of good stuff in there, and a lot of it is very aligned with what we've heard over the course of this event and with a lot of the work you all are doing. So I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, for explaining how to reduce emissions from every moo. But we also want to reduce emissions from every oink, and because of that, we are now pleased to introduce Jamie Burr, Chief Sustainability Officer at the National Pork Board. He leads a team around public health, animal welfare, environmental experts dealing with sustainability goals. He has a MS and BS from Missouri State University, and I want to welcome you to the stage, Jamie.
Thank you, Frank. I am here to talk about something much more simple, unintended. Oh, that's a rough crowd. Wow. Goodness gracious, where's the clicker? So I wanted to share a little bit about the pork industry and a little bit about the why of why I'm excited to be here, why I'm excited to do what I do every day. I'd like for you to write down three numbers. 3 million, 120,000, and 60,000. Can anybody tell me what those three numbers may represent? It's actually, to me, the saddest thing to talk about. And that is 3 million is the number of pork producers in the United States in the 1950s. 120,000 is the number of producers in the 1990s. The last number is the number of producers today. And why I think that's important personally is I believe farmers are the absolute fabric of rural America. They are our little league coaches. They are county commissioners. Just you go on and on. And if you want to know more, I would encourage you to read and listen to Paul Harvey's poem about the farmer, because I think it does a great job of outlining what farmers do every day. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the industry. In 2008, pork producers came up with the sustainability platform that we call We Care. And it's surrounded around these 6 We Care ethical principles: environment, food safety, animal well-being, our people, community, and public health. And within each one of those principles, there are goals and metrics that producers have established. And those goals and metrics really go into the formula that I have down below that I like to use, that's public trust. So principles, so the We Care ethical principles, practices, the practices that we have within those particular We Care ethical principles, such as pork quality assurance training that started in the 1980s, that trains caretakers on how to handle animals. It trains them how to take care of the environment, how to handle manure, etc. And then proof, and I'm going to talk about proof here in just a minute, but without proof, if you look at the product of that particular formula, public trust is zero. So we have to have all three of those for public trust. Share a little bit about a retrospective analysis that we released. This is over a 55-year period that Dr. Greg Thoma, who's now at Colorado State, developed. This was a 50-year look back from 1950 through 2015, so it was a 65-year look back. And over that period of time, 79% less land, 25% less water, 7% less energy, and 8% less carbon. And how we got there was feed conversion for the most part. Feed conversion over the past 50 years has almost decreased in half. It was nearly 5 pounds in the 1950s per pound of gain. Today, we're pushing 2.5 pounds of grain to get a pound of gain in the pork industry. Talk a little bit about a program that we have. It's very similar to what Sam talked about related to collecting on-farm data. And it goes into that proof piece. So we have a program in place where we have a third-party contractor, Eocene, that will go to the farm or sit down with the farm and will collect on-farm data. And it's collected in a very private way. I can't even see a producer's data. The only way that I can see data is aggregated, and that is if we have enough producers to aggregate that data from an antitrust perspective. That data is then turned into a report where the producer can see what their environmental outcomes of their farm are. Also, as part of the program, we provide what's called a SCIP report, so a Sustainable Continuous Improvement report, where they can then look at what is the ROI of changing practices, both financially and from an outcomes perspective. If they implement those practices, what does that mean to their environmental outcomes? This is also step one of a project that we have in collaboration with USDA and Nestle. And I think Daniel Peerless is in the room, but he's been a great partner within Nestle, where we're incentivizing producers to implement practices such as cover crops, reduced tillage, manure management, energy efficiency, et cetera. And we're able to incentivize that practice so that they can put that practice on the ground. This particular report can also be provided to the states, to the state pork associations, and it's used in many different ways. One is from a policy perspective. The Pork Board cannot work in the policy space, but our partners within the states can. So they use this report as an aggregated way to show what are the true outcomes in their state from pork production. So here's how we've been trending from a data perspective. In 2021 was our first year. We've nearly doubled the number of farms in a couple years that's been involved. We've increased the swine inventory by nearly 1 million head and then grown over 100,000 acres. Many don't know, but there's a lot of pork producers doing a pork production business because they're also in the grain business, and they use that manure to offset their manure or their commercial fertilizer use. Another topic, kind of switching gears a little bit, that I wanted to touch on is our board 4 years ago came out to the Clear Center and spent some time with Frank and the team and really looked at what would a partnership with the Clear Center look like. And it's really surrounded 3 things. One is research. 2 is capacity building. And what I mean by capacity building is I think Frank does a great job of developing grad students. And one of the things on Tuesday of this week that we got to do is have an advisory board meeting. And as part of that, my most favorite part of the 3rd advisory board meeting that I've been involved in is listening to the students. Listening to them talk about their work, being able to take science and turn it into sound bites that the lay people can understand, that the general public can understand. And then the 3rd thing is producer storytelling. I'm going to share a short clip, and I'm also going to prove that Dr. Mitloehner does get out in the field.
So this is where traffic happens, right? Where vehicles would drive onto a field, off a field. So the compaction here should be much higher, of course.
Yeah.
So let's see how that goes, okay? Ooh. Oh my God. Okay, I'm deep in the red, okay? I'm deep in the red. Jeez Louise. So I can imagine if compaction is as high as it is here, then water infiltration would be non-occurring.
Right.
But it's nothing compared to this, okay? I mean, this is just incredible how soft this is. This is like butter. This is like butter.
Yep.
And I love butter.
Yep. Totally.
Anyway, I would encourage you, go to the Clear Center website. There are about a half a dozen producer videos now, Kevin, out there. And they range from all over the country, from North Carolina to Minnesota. This was taken in Illinois. We're going to do some more in Nebraska and Iowa later this year. So excited about that. Oh, and went to Hawaii too, but I didn't get to go. Frank got to go. So I want to close with a couple things. One, all of this takes producer leadership. It is imperative that we have producers at the table to do this. And in this particular picture here is Maddie Hokanson and Eric Mittendahl with the Meat Institute. We had the opportunity last fall to go to COP. And what we did was just share the story of pork, share the story of American animal agriculture. And it was great to be able to take a producer this year because a producer can tell a story better than I can. And it's received a whole lot better when a producer tells a story as well. The second thing I want to close with is a challenge to everybody in this room, and it's 3 L's. Okay, I would encourage you sometime the rest of this year, if you don't do this, go put your boots on a farmer's farm and under their kitchen table, and do 3 things: listen, learn, and then lean into how your work can help them stay on the farm. With that, Frank?
Thank you very much, Jamie. So now we are moving to the next part. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, so we start out with Dr. Bowman. What are some of the tricky trade-offs you're aware of when managing methane, given other priorities such as nitrogen loss and food waste?
Oh, that is a great question. So one that comes to mind for me is, we all know about digesters as a strategy for dealing with enteric methane. But when you increase the nitrogen recoverability, you have a lot more nutrients, right, coming out of your manure. And then, so if you have an area and you have a limited amount of land to apply, you have those struggles with managing those nutrients. So that's one example. I think there's a lot of trade-offs also within the microbiome that we don't fully understand yet, some potential for synergies, but also some trade-offs. But I guess that manure technology is one that comes to mind, where you're keeping more of that nitrogen there, you're potentially increasing the value, but then also, if you're having trouble getting that nitrogen out there on the field, it's also a liability.
Thank you. A question for Minerva. So obviously, especially ruminant livestock uses a lot of biomass streams that otherwise would end up in landfills. Can you speak a little bit about what role they play and how important that role is?
Yeah, thanks. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here in talking about that, but yeah, I think there's a lot of material that we wouldn't necessarily call food waste because it's not necessarily edible. It's a lot of, plant material that is not digestible by humans, but it is digestible by animals. And so we're able to valorize that material and make use of all the resources and energy and emissions embedded in raising those crops, and we're able to recycle that back into the system. So we think it's a great solution.
Thank you. For Sam, what issues and opportunities from working across the supply chain in this space do you think others should know and learn about?
Issues and opportunities across the supply chain?
Yes.
I think we have kind of two major challenges, I would say, across the supply chain right now. The first would be, I guess, providing context to the U.S. cattle herd for those that maybe aren't as familiar. We have over 620,000 individual cow-calf producers in the United States. We also have 22,000 feed yard producers. So we have a lot of small businesses, right, that are operating on really thin margins. And while we have a lot of tools and solutions for technology, being able to actually implement those tools and solutions in reality is very challenging. And so the big supply chain challenge there is how can we reach more producers and meet them where they're at to be able to work with them on their operations and get some of those technologies implemented in a way that's gonna last. I would say just another issue that may be less relevant to the room today, but that is really pressing for the supply chain right now is thinking about water. That's a massive challenge, and it expands across all of agriculture in terms of water availability, especially around feed crop production. And it's an emerging challenge that we really need to be working quickly to find solutions on.
Thank you. We have an OINC question here. Historically, pigs were used to recycle farm waste, restaurant waste, etc. Given the food waste emissions, is there an opportunity to once again use pigs to upcycle this waste into high quality food?
And we do that today. I mean, especially in the bakery space, there's a lot of bakery meal that goes into the hog ration today. So I think, it's absolutely done already today.
Okay. Maria, question for you. Can you go over emission trade-offs between methane and nitrous oxide?
I'm not convinced we fully understand all the emissions trade-offs between methane and nitrous oxide. But one of the things I will say is that I think manure is a real opportunity to try and understand some of those better, right? Like we've talked a lot about the changes that could happen to manure storage, handling, processing, and land application. But what we don't know a lot about is how, ironically, at least in the US, we don't know a whole lot about what producers are doing with respect to manure management on fields. fertilizer application with that, and then how that's affected by what they're doing in terms of storage and handling. So frankly, I think there's a lot more data collection that needs to happen to understand those trade-offs. It looks different, right, in different animal systems too, right? Like obviously dairy and beef look very different, especially if you're looking at cow-calf operations and not being able to store that manure. So I'm punting on that one a little bit because I don't think we fully understand those.
Very good. For Minerva, we know that perishable foods, such as, let's say, fruit and vegetables, are wasted at a higher amount or degree than, let's say, animal source foods. Do LCAs account for the difference in food waste? So if you, let's say, do an LCA for plant-based versus animal-based foods, does the food waste play into that LCA calculation?
I wouldn't say I'm an expert in the LCAs. I haven't read them all, but to my understanding, there is an assumption, particularly at the farm level, around the resource intensity that's happening on farm going into that production. And then I think there have been quite a lot of studies examining each individual stage of the food value chain that sometimes capture the loss taking place. But it really is, I think, highly contextual. In developing countries, it's a very different story compared to the US and other places that, the distribution of loss is much more on the retail food service consumer side in places like the US, and it's much more on the production side in other places. So I think it's hard for the LCAs to find data that is representative across all systems.
Okay, for Sam, what type of producer incentives are you considering at the roundtable?
So we are working on building kind of that out right now with our research roadmap activation. So we have kind of a dedicated track towards producer outreach and engagement. But we don't have a solution yet because a lot of that comes with we need the funding, right, to be able to incentivize producers. So working to think through and with some of our economists, on what's going to be the best pathway.
Okay. You mentioned some numbers around reduced land use over the years in swine production. The person asking this question here says, considering the significant reduction in land use and so on, the 8% reduction of carbon emissions seems low. Would you please say whether the 8% reduction is gross emissions, net emissions, or emission intensity?
Great question. So that is an intensity, and it's on a per pound of pork.
Okay. That answer was so short that I can't even read the next one. Do we have a selection bias in opinions from farmers who engage in these topics? What's the attitude of the average producer on these issues? And I would say I give that to Sam.
Absolutely. I would say we have an unfair bias with the producers we're blessed to work with on a lot of these initiatives. They're early adopters, they're curious, they're willing, right, to try something and to fail. But I would say the broader, at least speaking for the US, beef community, I would say most producers aren't necessarily thinking about sustainability in the way that we all in this room think about it, right? They're thinking in terms of operational productivity and their bottom line because they need to have viable operations. But with that, I think is where kind of this world comes into play in providing producer support, because we can leverage the research that we know are going to help improve productivity and help with their main concerns so that they are getting better every day. And I would say, at least in our beef community, and I think Jamie would agree that I've never met a producer that's not looking to do better and do more.
So I point to a slide that I had on, that's a quote from Matty Hoke Hansen, and that is, when we know better, we do better. And I think that's, and also, if you look, several producers are multi-generational. In the current generation, there's not a single one of those that want to shoulder the responsibility of losing the farm. I mean, what a travesty that would be to them personally. So I think it's just, we don't realize like that burden that they carry to carry it to the next generation, whether they lose it from a disease perspective or an economic perspective, whatever it is, but it is, again, back to when we know better, we do better.
And I would build on that quickly, just that, we've talked a ton about the importance of data and research in the context of understanding measurable impacts on methane, right, over the course of these couple of days. Those data are hugely important to producers as well, right? Like if they can see, supply chain needs the data because they need to be able to verifiably report reductions, but a producer needs to see that data to be able to say, yes, this is worth it. I will take that risk.
I think also, if I could add to that, I think it also speaks to the importance of making sure we're doing our due diligence and investigating the economics at different farm sizes, because the things that work for the larger and more innovative producers aren't always going to work for smaller producers that don't have the same access to capital or the same number of head of animals. So I think that's a really important thing for us as researchers and economic researchers also.
Excellent. Well, we're almost at the end here. We have time for one more question, and that's the one for Minerva. Would you please give us an example of methane-reducing bioproducts to feed to livestock?
Lucky me. Well, I think, I mentioned Professor Kabrab's lab just published a paper on grape pomace. I think that indicated that there was a methane reduction. I've also heard about tomato pomace. We're funding the University of Georgia to look at what is available in their area, which is blueberries, onions, all sorts of agricultural products. So I think it's more a question of how do you take what's regionally available and what are the processes that we can maybe apply to make it more digestible, things like that, that sort of improve the likelihood and success of implementation.
Well, it has been my great pleasure to host you and this panel. This was a fascinating discussion, and I want to thank our panelists for their contributions.
Thank you.